Well, sorry about that, guys. I'm not sure what happened there, but it looks like I know a lot of people have been having power outages tonight, and a lot of people have been having internet outages. So hopefully that was our one internet outage for the night. And let's get started. Let's not waste any more time with silly stories from Mr. Martin. Okay, so Yorgis was working in the fertilizer plant last night. He got the new job. So, of course, Yorgis had made his home a miniature fertilizer mill a minute after entering. The stuff was half an inch deep in his skin. His whole system was full of it. And it would have taken a week, not merely of scrubbing, but vigorous exercise to get it out of him. As it was, he could be compared with nothing known to men, save the newest discovery of the savants, a substance which emits energy for an unlimited time, without being itself in the least diminished in power. He smelled so that he had made all the food at the table taste as it, and set the whole family to vomiting. For himself, it was 3 days before he could keep anything upon his stomach. He might wash his hands and use a knife and fork, but were not his mouth and throat filled with the poison. And still, Jurgis stuck to it. In spite of the splitting headaches, he would stagger down the plant and take up his stand once more and begin to shovel the blinding clouds of dust. And so at the end of the week, he was fertilizer man for life. He was able to eat again, and though his head never stopped aching, it ceased to be so bad that he could not work. And there passed another summer. It was a summer of prosperity all over the country, and the country ate generously of packing house products. And there was plenty of work for all the family, in spite of the packers' efforts to keep the superfluidity of labor. They were again able to pay their debts and begin to save a little sum. But there were one or two sacrifices they considered too heavy to be made for long. It was too bad that the boys should have to sell papers at their age. It was utterly useless to caution them and plead with them. Quite without knowing it, they were taking on the tone of their new environment. They were learning to swear in voluble English. They were learning to pick up cigar stumps and smoke them, to pass hours of time gambling with pennies and dice and cigarette cards. They were learning the location of all the houses of prostitution on the levee and the names of the madams who kept them, and the days when they gave their state banquets with the police captains and the big politicians all attended. If a visiting country customer were to ask them, they could show them which was Hinky Dink's famous saloon, and could even point out to him by name the different gamblers and thugs and hold-up men who made the place their headquarters, and and worse yet, the boys were getting out of the habit of coming home at night. What was the use, they would ask, of wasting time and energy and possible car fare riding out of the stockyards every night when the weather was pleasant and they could crawl under a truck or into an empty doorway and sleep exactly as well. So long as they brought home a $50 for each day, what mattered when they brought it in. But Jorgis declared that from this to ceasing to come at all would not be a very long step. And so it was decided that Villamus and Nicholas would return to school in the fall, and that instead Elisabetta should go out and get some work, her place at home being taken by her younger daughter. Little Katrina was like most children of the poor, prematurely made old. She had to take care of her little brother, who was a cripple, and also of the baby. She had to cook the meals and wash the dishes and clean the house and have supper ready when the workers came home in the evening. She was only 13 and small for age, but she did this without a murmur. And her mother went out, and after trudging a couple days about the yards, settled down as a servant of a sausage machine. Elisabetta was used to working, but she found this change a hard one, for the reason that she had to stand motionless upon her feet from 7 o'clock in the morning till 12:30, and again from 1 till 5:30. For the first few days, it seemed to her that she could not stand it and suffered almost as much as Jorgis had from the fertilizer. She would come out at sundown and her head feeling fairly reeling. Besides this, she was working in one of the dark holes by electric light, and the dampness, too, was deadly. There were always puddles of water on the floor and the sickening odor of the moist flesh in the room. The people who worked here followed the ancient custom of nature, whereby the color of dead leaves in the fall and snow in the winter, and the chameleon, who is black when he lies upon a stump and turns greens when he moves to the leaf. The men and women who worked in this department were precisely the color of the fresh country sausage they made. The sausage room was an interesting place to visit for 2 or 3 minutes, and provided that you did not look at the people. The machines were perhaps the most wonderful things on the entire planet. Presumably, sausage was once chopped and stuffed by hand, and if so, it would be interesting to know how many workers had been displaced by these inventions. On one side of the room were the hoppers, into which men shoveled loads of meat and wheelbarrows full of spices. In these great bowls were whirling knives that made 2,000 revolutions a minute. When the meat was ground, fine and unadulterated with potato flour, and well mixed with water, it was forced into the stuffing machines on the other side of the room. The latter were tended by women. There was a sort of a spout, like a nozzle of a hose, and one of the women would take a long string of casing and put the end over the nozzle and then work the whole thing on it, as one works on a finger of a tight glove. This string would be 20 or 30 feet long, but the women would have it on in a jiffy. And when she had several on, she would press a lever, and the stream of sausage meat would be shot out, taking the casing with it as it came. Thus, one might stand and see appear, miraculously born from the machine, a wriggling snake of sausage of incredible length. In front of it was a big pan, which caught these creatures. 2 or more women would seize them as fast as they appeared and twisted them into links. This was for the uninitiated the most perplexing work of all, for all the women had to do was give a single turn of the wrist, and in some way she contrived to give it so that instead of an endless chain of sausages, one after another, there grew under her hands a bunch of strings, all dangling from a single center. It was quite like the feat of the prestidigitator, for the women who worked so fast as the eye could literally not follow her, and there was only a mist of motion and a tangle after tangle of sausages appearing. In the midst of the mist, however, the visitor would suddenly notice the tense set face, with the 2 wrinkles graven in the forehead, and the ghastly pallor of the cheeks. And then he would suddenly recollect that it was time he was going on. The women did not go on. They stayed right there, hour after hour, day after day, year after year, twisting sausage links and racing with death. It was piecework, and she was apt to have a family to keep alive. And stern and ruthless economic laws had arranged it, and she, and she could do this by working just as she did, with all her soul upon the work, and with never an instant for a glance at all the well-dressed ladies and gentlemen who came to stare at her, as at some wild beast in a menagerie.